I'm going to talk to you today about rethinking pen testing. This is me, principal consultant at Red Siege. I like to do stuff, mainly I like to do things that aren't with computers in my off time. So I do photography and fishing and did some music, stuff like that. Enough about me. Before we get started, I do want to tell you that this is not a technical talk. So if you're looking for the latest and greatest techniques and tools and stuff like that, I'm sorry, that's not going to happen here. So if you want to go, I won't be offended. Just know that that's not what this talk is about. So why am I up here talking to you? Lots of reasons. But we get, clients come to us and they say, we want X. What does X mean? Like a popular example of that is like, we want a red team. What does that mean to you? Oh, we want you to do an unauthenticated test of our internet-facing web app. I've gotten that. They wanted us to red team their web app, unauthenticated. Are we going to try to get credentials? They're like, no. So there's a lot of confusion around a lot of terms. I think that some of the ways that we've done pen testing don't serve our clients the best. Specifically thinking the traditional network pen test. And someone asked me this morning, well, does this include external as well as internal? I'm talking more about internal here. I think that external is still something that needs to be done. We need to know what our attack surface is that's out there facing the internet. But a traditional network pen test, how does it work? You've got a box, you drop it on the network, maybe it's Kali or something else. You run an SS scan, you run some type of port scan and enumerate a bunch of hosts on the network. You find out what's going on. You fire up Metasploit, you start lobbing exploits at things, you start password spraying, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that that stuff isn't valuable. Like, you don't need to do those things. You do need to do those things. But a real attacker, hopefully, does not have a Kali box sitting on your network. Even if they did, if they don't want to get caught, they're not going to operate like a traditional network pen test. So I don't think that that kind of testing prepares our clients for the threats that they're actually facing in the real world. I'm not saying that these tests aren't valuable, that they don't have valuable. But I'm saying I don't think they properly prepare our clients for the things they're going to see in the real world. On the plus side, of all the testing types I'm going to talk about, they're the most likely test to find vulnerabilities. Are you missing patches? Do you have an RCE in this network device? Network pen tests are designed to find those. Assume breach, red team, things like that, not necessarily looking for those. Not saying that they won't, but they're much less likely to find those. So is there a better way? I believe so. There are different kinds of tests that could serve your clients. We've got assume breach, purple teams, even red teams. All of those serve that purpose of better preparing our clients for real world threats. So I kind of want to talk about these because there's a lot of confusion. If you watch on Twitter and you see people discuss things, you know that these terms are often conflated and confused. So let's talk about it a little bit. I went through and I looked at a bunch of vendors and looked at the services they offered. And I tried to figure out, like, what do they call an assume breach, or what do they call a red team? There's all these different terms. And for like assume breach, a pivot, assume breach, maybe attack simulation. But in the same vein, I saw companies calling red teams a red team, comprehensive testing, adversarial attack simulation, threat modeling, adversary simulation, all these different terms, but when you read the blurbs about what the test is, they were all talking about the same thing. They were all talking about a red team or an assumed breach. So we've got all these different terms. Maybe we should have some kind of ISO standard for our industry to be like, what is it you're buying? You know, is this a widget? It's a widget. That's what it's called. It's a widget. Everyone knows what it is. What is a red team? No one knows. It could be any of these things. It could be many more beyond this. Just some examples. But what is a red team? Keep in mind, I'm not saying that I'm the expert. This is just my opinion and things I've gleaned from people I respect. But you've got things that are more advanced. A red team is designed to be a very advanced type of test for a very mature environment. How do they work? Well, we're trying to emulate some type of advanced attacker. Could be we're trying to emulate a specific nation state. More often, we're trying to emulate a generic advanced attacker using a variety of techniques. How do we get in? Most commonly with a red team, you're starting on the outside. So you might fish or vish or smish or apparently quish, QR phishing. That's what we're calling that now. So quishing, we might do that. We might do physical. You know, we might do physical and try to get in your place and then drop a Raspberry Pi or something on your network so now we have a beachhead inside calling out. Could be those things. A lot of different things in the red team. Because there's not a single answer. If someone tells you this is how a red team is done, specifically, they're wrong. Because the answer to how you do the red team is adaptive to what the client wants and needs and what the client has. It's kind of like that quote, like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Like the red team has to be very, very adaptive. Like maybe we're going to do phishing. Phishing wasn't working at all. Now what? We have to do something. We got to react. Let's say we get into your network and now we have, some kind of beachhead in the network. Red teams aren't noisy. We're not firing up a Nessus scan on a red team unless we want to scare the heck out of the blue team. But that's not usually the goal. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to evade detection. We're trying to get persistence because people are going to reboot their laptops. They're going to go home for the night. They're going to get patched. And we're going to lose our access. So now we have to get persistence without getting caught. And then we need to move laterally through the network. We probably want to escalate privileges. And we're doing all of that while trying to evade detection. But it's not just for no purpose. Like there is a goal with a red team, or at least there absolutely should be. It shouldn't be just go forth and hack and have fun. Like sometimes clients be like, yeah, we just want you to hack us. Like, what do you want to get out of this at the end of the engagement? That's the important question. So usually they're goal focused. It might be, hey, we want you to get to this specific client database in this DMC. I've had tests where clients are like, we want you to steal plans for manufacturing our most sensitive things. And they're in SharePoint. Here's the general area, but you got to figure out how to get there and steal it. Those are goal-focused kinds of attacks or tests. Another thing about red teams is they're really long. That someone, people will come up with like, yeah, we want a red team. What's your budget? 2 weeks. Like, no, that's not going to happen. Because part of the problem is it's in the name. Team, red team. Like you shouldn't be doing red teaming as a team of one person. So if it was a 2-week test, that's 1 week of actual engagement. Red teams are long. How long? Really depends. I would say no fewer than 6 weeks. That might be 3 weeks by 2 testers. But I talk to a lot of people that they say when they're selling red teams, they start at 12 weeks. and go up from there. Red teams are expensive. They take a long time. And the other thing you should be aware about a red team is that it's not about testing defenses so much. Like, oh, does the firewall stop this? Does EDR stop that? It's about testing defenders. We're seeing the most important thing out of red team to me is how does the blue team respond to the attack? Can they identify us? Can they identify our persistence channels and mechanisms? And can they eradicate us from the network? Like it's about testing people, not technology. And like I said, red teams are long. Thanks to Zephyrfish on Twitter. I saw this morning and had to add that in there. And I think it's true because clients think, oh, well, we didn't see a whole lot of attack traffic from you. It didn't look like you did anything for the first 2 weeks of the test. Yeah, that's true because you gave us your company name, abc.com, and said, go forth and hack. So to do a red team to hack abc.com, I need to know who they are. Who are their employees? What do those employees do? I got to figure out a ruse, and if I have a ruse, what kind of employee is that ruse most likely to work on? Or conversely, maybe I want to attack IT people, so I need to go out and figure out who the IT people are, and then design a ruse that's going to work on IT people. There's a lot of research involved. I'm going to try to figure out, where is your email hosted? Do you have some type of email protection, proof point, or whatever that's sitting out in front of your final MX? Sometimes you can enumerate DNS records to figure out protections that they have inside. Look at LinkedIn for lots and lots and lots of employees. What technologies do they have listed that they're current in? That tells me what's inside and what I'm up against. There's a lot of research in a red team. On the plus side of red teams, they give you a really, really, really good idea about how you're going to fare against a real world adversary. Because if you're doing your job, you're emulating a real world adversary. You can model real world tactics and techniques. You can use things that you're seeing happening in the real world. It's great. On the downside, these tests are expensive. If someone's trying to sell you a cheap red team, run as far and as fast away as possible. Like it's just not possible because it requires a lot of R&D to get a payload, to get the ruse, to figure out who they are, to develop backup payloads and mechanisms. And attackers have unlimited time, really. We don't. We're bound by some kind of budget. So there are limitations to what we can realistically do. Another problem with a red team is this. So clients think, oh, you just got to fish. You just got to fish our employee and get in. The reality is, first, I have to figure out a ruse. And I have to get the right employee on the right day with the right ruse. What do I mean by that? Well, if you are having a good day, there's no stress in your job, you can look at the email and you'll be like, yet, not going to do it. But if your house just burned down, or your company just did a bunch of layoffs, or someone just, YOLO patched prod and now everything's down, you're probably stressed. And if you're stressed, you're distracted and you're looking at your email and you're like, yeah, I know I got to get this thing completed. I'll finish training right now. Click. Okay, so we got the right employee with the right ruse on the right day because they were distracted. Let's back that up. How did they get that email? I had to get the email into their inbox if we're phishing. Well, maybe they have proof points sitting in front of M365. So I have to get this ruse past Proofpoint, and I have to get it past M365. And I also have to have my infrastructure protected. So if you have ever heard of something like Netcraft, Netcraft is out there scanning the internet on companies' behalves. And let's say you're going to do a Microsoft 365 themed phishing page, and Netcraft scans your phishing landing page because you didn't have it properly protected. They see that Microsoft 365 landing page and they report that to Microsoft, and then they give you a domain takedown notice. Ask me how I know. So you need to protect your infrastructure. You got to get your email past all the filters. You got to get it to the right employee on the right day. Now stuff starts to happen. What do they have for endpoint protection? We may or may not know. Let's say they have endpoint protection and we know what they have. How do they have it configured? We probably don't know. Is there app allow listings sitting on the workstation that prevents our payload that got past EDR? But guess what? The payload can't run. So we have to do all these things. And then we have to not get caught. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you shouldn't do these tests, but they require a lot of maturity to realize value. So you need to have your stuff together before you get these kinds of tests. In the middle, we've got assume breach. What is an assume breach? We assume a breach has happened. What happens now? So let's bypass all of the stuff we just talked about in the red team and get to the point that someone has clicked on a payload or given up their credentials. Now, these can be more red teamy in that there's zero knowledge. An insider has given us a laptop, go forth and hack. No one else in the company knows that it's going on. So now we have to act just like a red team, but we fast forwarded through a whole lot of crap. And now we can just focus on doing testing. On the other side of the coin, we can do full knowledge. The blue team knows we're there. Sometimes we're sitting in chat rooms with them or sitting in the room with them. We're not trying to hide, which means we can operate really fast. We can find more things. We can cover more ground and generate a lot more data for the blue team to look at and be like, do we actually have detections for these things? What does an assume breach do? Sometimes they're goal focused like a red team. Sometimes they're about seeing if an attacker compromises Joe in accounting. What can an attacker do with Joe's access? Where can he go? What data can he steal? What systems can he access? What damage can he do? So we try to do the testing from that perspective. I will tell you that if we're focused on coverage, the client wants us to find as much as possible, we'll say that's overt testing. We're not trying to hide. Hey guys, we're here, we're making a lot of noise. That's us. If it's focused on testing detections, like can the blue team identify us and kick us out? That's covert testing. So those kinds of tests are going to be much quieter and probably won't find nearly as many things because now we're not focused on finding stuff, we're focused on playing cat and mouse so that can the client find us. When we're testing detections, it's good to have conversations with the client about like, what kind of detections do you have? Oh, we detect curb roasting. Tell me, how do you detect curb roasting? Well, we detect it anytime someone curb roasts. Okay, let's pull one ticket. Let's wait 90 minutes and pull another ticket. Most clients aren't going to see that because, unfortunately, curb roasting is like how Active Directory was designed. Like, it's designed to give you tickets so you can access services. So you're seeing these things happen. So if you stay below the noise floor, is the detection there? Do a large LDAP query. Oh, we detect bloodhound. Do you detect bloodhound with one collection method enabled? Only one at a time. That's a bunch of LDAP queries, but not a huge amount. So we're testing specific detections. On the plus side of an assumed breach, same thing as a red team. Better understanding of what happens when you get punched in the face. And you can model real world tactics. The downside on an assumed breach, part of the plus of an assumed breach for a client is like, hey, you don't have to pay for 10 weeks of testing. We can do this in 3. But because we're doing it in 3 weeks of testing, we only have 3 weeks of testing. So that means we have an operational tempo that has to be faster by definition. We're not focused on vulnerabilities. I can tell you, I am not looking to see if a workstation is missing patches other than the workstation I land on. Like, I'm not going out and enumerating the rest of the network. I'm not looking to see if you've got, I don't know, network device X patched, unless that's something that needs to be done as part of the attack I'm trying to, simulate. But normally I'm not looking for patches. And there are some real ways that you can get hamstrung on an assumed breach. So if I want to know what happens to Joe in accounting when he gets compromised, if you give me a workstation that is just Windows 10, it doesn't have any applications on it, doesn't have anything that Joe uses, doesn't have any of your standard software on it, how can I realistically test what happens from Joe's machine? For example, I've got a client that had IBM Lotus Notes on their machine. I know IBM Lotus Notes, but it happens. And IBM Lotus Notes had a vulnerability in it that allowed code execution and privilege escalation. And I was able to build a specific payload to exploit that and get system on that workstation. Now, if everyone in your company has Lotus Notes and the workstation you give me doesn't, I can't tell you about that vulnerability. I don't know about it. I never had a chance to see it, most likely. So I have to have a representative workstation. But just as important, I have to have a representative account because I need to go where Joe can go. But like any good enterprise environment, if Joe's been around more than a minute, Joe has groups that aren't part of the default accounting group. Oh, well, we need Joe to get into this sales thing over here. And, well, we haven't figured out permissions, so they've got access to the IT share so we can deploy this application. Though that kind of cruft that comes along with a real world account isn't there if you just build me a new account and don't give me any permissions. And therefore, I can't find those things that are associated with those permissions issues. So you need to make sure you have a representative workstation with a representative account. Purple teams. Purple teams are great, but what does it mean? What does it mean? I've had clients say, I want to have a purple team. Okay, what would you like this purple team to look like? Well, we're going to have you do a test, and then when the test is over, we're going to talk about the report. Someone has actually said that to me. Like, we're not just going to have a debrief call, we're going to go in a little bit more, but it was completely after the fact. Maybe a valid approach, not how I would do it. I think that purple teams are best when they've got specific goals, maybe to let's see what happens when APTXYZ compromises us. Let's run their playbook and test all the detections and preventions that would be associated with that. And it's very interactive. Sometimes it's very like, we're going to lay out these techniques. This is exactly what we're going to do. But sometimes it's, all right, we're going to all sit in a room or in a chat room. I'm going to hack, and you're going to tell me what you see. So I'm going to go do this thing. Did you see it? All right, great. Okay, I'm going to go do this other thing. Hey, wait, we didn't see that. Okay, let's dig into that. Why didn't you see it? Let's retool the detection and run it again and work together very collaboratively. Instead of me telling you, this is how we do a purple team, I say, what do you want to get out of this and how do we achieve that? So for me personally, I don't like to put the client in a box and say, this is the test you get. I say, what is the test you want? What is the outcome you want? And then how can I design the test to achieve that? Purple teams are usually focused on specific goals. We want to test these kinds of detections. We want to test these kinds of scenarios. We have assumptions. We can detect curb roasting. Prove it. Let's go test that. We can detect X. Sometimes it's about processes. It's almost like an interactive IR tabletop. Okay, this happened. What's the next thing you're going to do? Oh, we're going to do this and shut off this access and shut off this access and shut off this. Okay, great. You disabled my account, but you didn't reboot my laptop. So my session is actually still valid to Active Directory for a bit. And you didn't kill my VPN. So I'm still connected to your network. So you did not eradicate the threat. Let's update the playbook. So purple teams kind of looking from that perspective. Very collaborative team, again, very collaborative, goal-focused. On the plus side, we get to confirm that what you say you're doing, you're doing. You get to confirm that you can see what we're doing. They're very collaborative. They're reactive. They're a lot of fun. I think that there's a lot of benefit, and both teams should grow if it's successful. On the downside, not looking at vulnerabilities. Unlike an assumed breach, we're probably not looking where can we go once the compromise happens. We're not looking for the full chain. Same thing with what can we access. We're not looking for all of that because our focus is more about these specific goals. So what, you may ask, Mike, is your recommendation for going forward? The way that I think most clients should test is an assumed breach. Now, keep in mind, this requires some level of maturity. If you have never had a pen test before and you're still got, Windows XP and 2003 boxes on your network, an assumed breach is going to be painful. That's like coming in as a white belt and sparring with a, whatever level black belt. You're just going to not have fun. So, you need some level of maturity. But once you have some level of maturity, you've done some tests, you've put in some detections, you've hardened things, assumed breach is a great way to figure out, are we doing things correctly? There's a couple of different ways in my mind that you can approach it. Keep in mind, I'm not telling you this is the only way an assumed breach can be done. What happens when a user gets compromised? And what happens when a user gets pissed off? Like two different models, and they're two different kinds of threats. Someone got laid off and we didn't terminate their access, and then they encrypted all of the Cisco router or locked out all of the Cisco routing infrastructure in the city of San Francisco. That is the malicious insider threat. The Bob in janitorial clicked on a payload and now we have a beachhead. That is the compromised user. So we've got a few different scenarios there, and there's different flavors of that, but that's the general idea. We start with a workstation and an account that are representative of the real world. Ideally, if you can do this, if you know you have a test coming up and someone leaves the company, disable their account and keep their machine. And then when the test starts, give them that account and that machine. You can't get any more real world than someone just left the company and here's their account. Because guess what? How many people have passwords.txt, passwords.onenote, those kinds of things shared? A lot. And now we can show you exactly what happens when a real user gets compromised. And not saying that that is a bad person. I'm not placing blame. I'm just saying that we know these things happen in the real world because we don't do IT well, and users come up with creative ways to get around frustration. Let's find those. If you can't give a real world machine, get a machine that's as close as possible. Make sure it has the software that would be expected for that user, and maybe clone a real user account. So path A for a compromised user would be like, let's simulate someone who clicked on a payload. So we're going to ship you some type of C2 payload, or you're going to give us a laptop, or we're going to RDP into it, and we're going to execute a payload, and we're going to operate over a C2 framework. That's mainly how that kind of test goes. And then we're going to see where can we go with that. Wow, there we go. So path B, what happens if a user gives up their credentials? We have a phish. Can we get remote access into the network using that laptop? So can we VPN? Where can we go from there with the tools that are on the workstation? We're not going to try to do C2. Let's see what all the tools on the workstation, how can they be abused by an attacker to execute code, get past EDR, whatever, and then maybe we start doing C2. But we focus more on like, what can we do with that asset? How can we abuse it? Should EDR be disabled? Yes or no? Put your hands if you say yes to start this test. Put your hands if you say no. Put your hands if you ask the client, do they want us to start with it enabled or disabled? Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So it's not my decision whether or not it should be disabled. It's the client's decision. And it's up to us to talk to them about the pros and cons of that approach. We know, given time, any EDR can be bypassed. So is it worth the client's dollars for my time to come up with a working bypass? Because sometimes on Friday, I've got a working CrowdStrike bypass. And then definitions got updated, and Monday morning when the test starts, I don't have a bypass anymore. Do you want me to spend a bunch of time to get around that, or would you rather assume that I'm going to be successful and allow my payload to run so I can start the test? Both are valid approaches. If you know Justin Elzy from Trusted Sec, his way of approaching it is to ask the client, let's start with it enabled. And then how about if we can't get past it at this time, Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning at 10 a.m., some point that we've discussed, if we do not have code execution, let's then roll back protections and start the test. But we're only going to do that on our initial access workstation. We're not going to do that everywhere. So we're just going to get started, but we're going to get punched in the face somewhere down the road. But lots of times, once we have that initial access, it's easier to establish C2 somewhere else in the network than it is to start on that initial workstation, because lots of times it's easier to pop on a server and then get it. Don't ask me why, but that's just been my experience. All right. It is now time to buy. All right. So you want to buy a pen test. What are your goals? Before you ever call me, you should have asked yourself these questions. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you all of these questions on the call. What do you want to get out of this test? Do you want to test detections and the controls that you have in place that restrict attackers from doing things? Do you want to identify misconfigurations and vulnerabilities? Do you want to know what can an attacker access? Can we detect lateral movement? Those kinds of things. Do you want a compliance check mark? Because we've literally had people come up and be like, I just need a pen test. It's required by the standard. You definitely don't want a red team. Like, I'll sell it to you, but it's going to be really expensive and it's not what you need. So what do you need? Once you know what you need, what is your budget? I want all of these things. What is your budget? 1 week. Answer I'm going to tell you is probably assumed breach is probably the best approach. We may not cover everything, but we're going to cover a lot of bases. Pretty much always going to find a bunch of issues, and we can fit that into your budget. but we're going to tell you we're not covering everything. We know we can't cover everything. We can't do a red team in that time, for sure. Another question that people don't think about, hey, I want to have a purple team. Okay, how much of your blue team's time can you dedicate to the purple team? Because if you want to have this really interactive, collaborative test where we're all sitting in a room, we're figuring stuff out, we're whiteboarding, and we're doing attacks and that, and your blue team has all these meetings they have to go to, or they have to respond to real incidents, because that happens all the time. Haha, we see what you're doing. It was like, I'm reporting right now. I'm not actually doing anything, so you should take a look at that. Like, how much time can the blue team actually dedicate to the purple team? Because if you want a purple team, but you're not going to give your defenders a lot of time to be involved, you're kind of getting like purple team light, assumed breach kinda, but neither of them are the right thing. Like, it should have been one or the other. There's probably a better way. And lots of times we don't know that until we get to the test, and then plans changed, and now, oh, well, we can't dedicate all these people, so we've got our intern. He's going to sit in with you. Lost a lot of potential value on that purple team because of that, and we didn't know about it till we showed up. So you have to have these questions thought about when it comes time to buy. And if you're a consultant who's offering these services, you should be asking these questions rather than trying to sell them this thing. I'm always going to try to steer you to an assumed breach because I think it's the best value for your money. But I'm going to ask you what you want. And if you tell me I want this, then we're going to do that. But I'm going to try to tailor it to the thing that's best for you, get the most value. And you should be doing that if you are a consultant and you're selling these services. Another thing you can think about is like this maturity model. If you do not have a mature program, you have just started your security program, you still haven't really figured out patching, you're not locking anything down with GPOs and any of that, you should probably get the external-internal test, because we're going to find a lot of things. And those are things that you can address, and hopefully, rather than just patching the problem, you identify the situation that caused the problem to happen in the first place. We figure out the systemic issue. And you do that a few years, and you get patching in place, and you build up the processes, and you can move to assume breach. I've had clients do this. Like the first year I came in on an internal network pen test, it was a bloodbath from external and internal. Next year I went back on the internal, I had to fight. I had to fight a lot to get very much ground. The next year we did an assume breach. It was kind of bad because they weren't focused necessarily on those kinds of things. But then they knew what to look for. And we had discussions about, this is how you detect what we do. This is how you prevent what we do. Come back the next year, I'm getting punched in the face. Pretty quick turnaround. They got maturity. And they were able to move into this point where they can do a purple team or an assume breach or a pivot test, sometimes you hear them called. Only when you have very robust processes and procedures, a well-trained team, do you start going into this like red team place, because it's a very different skill set, highly sophisticated, techniques and very skilled testers coming in doing some crazy ninja stuff. And if you're not ready for that, like, it's not going to be a fun time for you. And it's going to cost you a lot of money for something that you weren't ready for. But there are clients who absolutely should be getting these kinds of testing because they're acing the assumed breach every year. And they want to know now, like, what can we do more? Let's craft a specific scenario and then see how that plays out. Those are kinds of fun kinds of tests, because now we get to do lots of crazy stuff and specific focus, but we're still providing value. But for most clients, I don't think this is the right approach. Like, I really don't think it serves most clients well. Again, another meme, saw this last week, had to throw it in. Like, you might want a red team, but maybe you should just focus on doing the basics. Like, let's start there, because that's going to cost you less money and you're going to get more return. So, we're at 41 minutes in, so we got some time for questions. I am Mike at redsiege.com. I am on Twitter. I'm Hardwater Hacker. On most of the social stuff as Hardwater Hacker. You should follow Red Siege because you'll find out where we're speaking, where our talks are, Siegecast that we have coming up, all that kind of stuff. Follow the Red Siege Twitter account. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, this is me. I think you should join our Discord. It's a great community. I know there are a lot of Discords out there, but I think ours is special. We're also like the official support Discord for Cobalt Strikes. So if you have questions, come and talk to us. We have this great thing called the Wednesday Offensive. Every Wednesday, we have people who are doing interesting things in security. Sometimes it's offensive people talking about hacking and hacker war stories, but we also have Blue Team representing. We've had, Amanda Berlin and Lit Moose and a bunch of really talented incident responders and forensics people come on and tell us about what they're doing. And it's interactive. You can ask questions. It's 30 minutes, starts at 12:30 Central Time, finishes at 1 o'clock Central Time. I think you should be there. Would love to have you. It's a great community. If you want to copy the slides, they are up on our website right now, redsiege.com/rethink. You can get the slides. For those of you that this is your first Wild West Hackin' Fest, congrats. Thanks for being here, because this truly is the best conference that I come to because I get the most meaningful conversations with people. I learn so much every time I'm here, and so thank you for coming and being a part of this. If you've been here many years, thank you for continuing to support and making this possible. Thank you, Black Hills. It's now time for questions. I do have to tell you that I have to throw this buffalo.
Hold on.
Are we on? We're not. Oh.
Mike,
Yeah?
we have a question from our remote viewers.
Yes.
Why the handle hardware hacker?
Hardware. So it's actually hard water. So this has nothing to do with water that has lots of minerals in it. If you live in the North Country, we have two seasons, water you can't walk on and water you can walk on. The latter is hard water season. I love to ice fish. It's kind of a passion. I love to sit outside on a bucket and catch fish. And years ago, I was sitting at a Sands Net Wars and I needed a handle, and it was like ice fishing season. And I like to social engineer fishes, convince them to bite my hook, and then put them in the frying pan. It's like hardwater hacker. So that's how it came up. Any more online questions? No, that's it. So there we go. So this is a microphone. I'm going to throw it at you. Reality is I can't throw very well, so it's probably going to have to be passed along. Talking to the head, not the butt. Question. Oh, wait, hold on. I don't want to throw the presenter remote at you. Thank you, sir.
Where was the question?
Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of clients' appetite for the volume of recommendations? Like, if you see any patterns or consistency in clients that prefer, a lot fewer recommendations so that it's more realistic to address them before it goes stale?
So we've had very few people that have ever said, like, you gave us too much. We have a very comprehensive report, and 95 times, 99 times out of 100, our clients tell us this is the best report we've ever received. It's the most thorough. We don't overwhelm you with findings. We're not in it for like racking up points. So we try to like lump them together. If there's a bunch of them that are just about the same flavor of finding, instead of having, like, oh, we found credentials in network shares and sensitive information in shares, and too many people had access to the shares, you've got a share permissions problem, and just a problem with your file sharing. And so that becomes more generic finding with multiple recommendations to address rather than killing you with a bunch of findings. We don't normally find people that complain because we gave them too much. So, hope that answered the question. Yes, over here. We need to get the microphone over here. Throw it.
This isn't going to go well.
It's designed to be thrown. That's closer than I would have gotten. Woohoo!
What do you see as the key activities after the test is completed?
From the client perspective or mine?
Client.
So key activities after the test is completed. Like, we're going to send you the report. You're going to go through that report. Please have the debrief call. Like, it's built into the project allocation. We set aside time to talk to you. Get on the call, ask us questions. Like, hey, you recommended this, but do you think we could approach it this way? Like, we'll absolutely tell you if we think that we can do that. Sometimes I got to go back and do some research and then send off some more information. Once you've had those questions and you've done that, now it's time to start making an action plan. And anyone who tells you you have to fix all the things in the report has never heard of the word risk assessment, because you should be doing a risk assessment. You should be looking at the findings we give you and not taking them verbatim. Yes, this is what we have to do. How do we want to treat this finding as a company? Do we think it's high? I might rate something as a low because I don't have the context. And then you look at it and go like, man, if he knew what he was doing, if he had known this thing was over here, he would have completely destroyed us. Maybe you want to upvote that to a high and handle it really quickly. But do a risk assessment and prioritize, and then get your projects set up to do those. I think, my opinion, there's advice out there that you should rotate your pen test vendor every X number of years. I don't necessarily think that's the right approach. I've got a client that I've worked with for years, talks about building a relationship. So we get to have a relationship. I come into your place year after year, I now start to know a lot more things, and then be like, hey, wait a second, what about this thing over here? Did you guys fix that? Oh man, yeah, we should test that. Like, there's some institutional knowledge that comes with that, and part of that relationship building. So I think that's something valuable. However, getting different perspectives is also value. I'm not saying don't ever rotate, but do what's the best for you. I've got like 1.5 minutes left if someone has a question, and then I will be at the booth all day. Right over here with the lanyard. Yeah, that's about how I would have gone.
For red team engagements, how do you present your information gathering and OSINT in a meaningful, consumable way?
Yeah, so for us, presenting the output, a lot of like the OSINT stuff, we're just collecting, and we'll give you an archive of what we found, and we give you the things that we use go in the report. Like, we found this information, and based on this information, we took this action, and based on the output of that action, we now collected this information and then did this with it. And we kind of draw a picture and then refer to supporting data archives rather than having a 500-page report of OSINT. Like, we do the OSINT, give you the archive, and reference it with specific examples of how we used it. So with that, I want to thank all of you to be here. I will be at the Red Siege booth when this is over if you have questions.